Hello. dear. شهربانی Hello? Someone there? Yeah, I don't hear you at all. I see you're a viewer, but it doesn't seem like you're in the room. Let's see if I can add you. It's like when you're on the desktop from the Hangout on your video, join the video call. Do you see that at all? Do you see that at all? I'm not sure, maybe the mobile. I don't remember. Maybe I have to invite you. Okay. Invite more. Invite. Invitation set. Maybe that helps. So we have 2 viewers now. So if you can send me your email on the events. Okay, you can hear me. You can see if you post your email, maybe I can add you. Oh, student. There's a way to do this. There we go. Added you. So from there, you should be able to somehow get into the chat. Okay, let's see if I can take that. Okay. Get invited you. Jamie, did you get in? Maybe Tracy. And then Amy. Should invite you. But it sounds like you guys can hear me. It's like if you're invited to a Hangout, you can join the broadcast a few ways on the desktop from the click to join video call. Oh, there we go.
Almost.
I see you.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, finally. Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like we just have to invite the people and then they can.
Yeah, my problem is
You're going in and out. I can't hear you very well. Yeah, I don't hear you anymore.
oh, I was on mute.
Okay.
No, I was hearing myself in the background because I had the
Okay.
video on. So, okay.
Okay.
So my issue was that I did not have the Hangouts open. I think that was my
Okay.
issue. So, and I was viewing it right through here, right, what you're presenting right now. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was my problem. Okay. Even though
Okay.
I do have problems with the exercise, but that we'll go discuss after the class.
Uh-huh. So you have to go to like the Google Hangouts, and then here there's probably like Hangouts on Air, maybe. Is that?
I got your request and I just
Yeah.
clicked on it and I
Okay.
opened. Yes, I got
All
the
right.
request right through here, through the Hangouts, and I closed this one because this one I was hearing the feedback.
Okay. So I think we have 2 people. I think Tracy's probably trying to get on now. 3 people responded. 1 person said they wanted to go in class. Did anyone actually go to class? I don't have any emails about it. Let's see if anyone else has joined yet. Viewer. I wonder if Tracy is the one viewing. Tracy, if you can hear, you can maybe chat in here. I mean, if you don't want to talk, then I guess that's okay too. We'll give it some more time, a little bit more. How do you pronounce your name, Jamie or Jaime?
Jaime.
Jaime?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Jaime. Yeah.
How do you pronounce your name, Jamie or Jaime? Maybe while we're waiting, do you want to go over your problem you have?
Sure, sure. I think that my issue is on the second loop. I'm trying. I could generate the numbers right from 1 to 31, but for some reason, I guess that I have to put the date somewhere around there so I could find out whether is a zero on the weekday
Mm-hmm.
to be able to filter with the if statement, right? So right now I hard coded and I shifted it, and it looks like it's supposed to be a calendar, but I'm not happy, and I'm sure I'm only gonna get half of the points on that.
Okay.
And I could probably share my screen and show you, or post it in the chat box.
I don't know if I want to share it just
Oh, that's
right
fine.
now,
That's
just because then everyone can see it.
fine. That's fine.
Oh, Tracy's on now too, I think.
Yeah, she's on.
Cool. So I'm not sure if anyone else is going to respond. There's 3 people that said yes. No other emails. Tomorrow, class is canceled if you haven't seen that yet. The SBC is closing.
And Pinella School is off too.
Up and on school's off too.
Yes, my daughter goes to high school, so it's. So I work with an Adam, right? And we do meetings all the time. We hangouts, and I'm looking when I'm like, what the heck Adam is doing in this call? and I totally forgot you're Adam.
That's funny. All right, so let me share my screen, and we're going to maybe start our. Oh, look at that! Start our thing. Let's stop presenting 1 second. See if I can just share the video. Show. Let's see. What do you see? That's black to you. Is that black to you?
Yes, the cup.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it is. If you're trying to present something, it's a black screen.
Maybe if I show the whole screen. Entire screen. You can see that now, other than the inception.
Yep.
Okay.
I can see.
All right, so we can get started. I just downloaded this, and I've never used LibreOffice. I just reinstalled my computer. slideshow, start from current slide. All right, so what we're going to do is we have two different sections of things we would like to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is arrays, and the second one we're going to talk about functions and function closures. And this is just kind of the overview of what we're going to go over. So this should be a good class. There's about a little over 20 slides, so it shouldn't take too long. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the creation of arrays. It's pretty simple, similar to our creating variables, but the only extra thing is we have these square brackets. And for this example, this is creating an empty array with no elements. We call the variable empty, and this square brackets represents we are creating an empty array. So this allows us to add items to the array and remove items if there are any items to remove, and if we want to use this array in our rest of our code. So the second one is creating a variable called primes and initializing it to the values 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 7, 11. So this is 5 numeric elements within this array. This is just one example. You can create an array. The array doesn't have to consist of just numbers or just strings or just booleans. As you can see here, we can create arrays of different types: floats, booleans, or true, false, and strings. And then trailing comma, I'm not really sure what that one does. Maybe that just adds an empty item in the the fourth index, or the third index, because we're at base 0. Now we're creating a variable called base, and then we're putting it into the table called table, an array called table. And what this is doing is it's saying in the first index we're going to put 1, 0, 2, 4. In the second index we're going to add 1 to it. So it's going to be 1, 0, 2, 5, and then so on and so on. So there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 elements in this array, and it's going to be 1024, 1025, 1026, 1027. For another example, we have an array with 3 elements, and the second element is undefined, as we see here, index 1. There's also another way of creating arrays, and that's with our new and array constructor. And this is just creating an empty array similar to our empty array right here. This second way of creating an array, this constructor says we're going to create 10 empty items in the array. And the third one is going to be creating an array with each one of these items are going to be a element in the array. This one is going to be a string, even though there's a comma in there. Since they're double quotes, this is going to be one element. Maybe we will do an example of a few of these. Whoops. Let's go to previous, and maybe we can end slideshow and copy this over. Save this as a JavaScript file. So we'll do print, log out, console log, empty, this to like all of them. Terms, miscellaneous, base, our table, let's use base, count. A, we're going to want to print an A after each one of these guys. We'll put this down here. All right, so here we go. Take a look at this. So we have empty, doesn't show anything. It's just an empty array. The primes, as you can see here, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Miscellaneous, 1.1, true, and A. And that shows that there's a space when I highlight it. As you can see, the empty one shows a space too when I highlight it. And then base, as you can see here, this is 1024, and then in our table you can see when we added one to each time, 24, 25, 26, 27. Our count, we have 1 with an undefined there, and then the 3, and then our A, which is an empty array. Then we have 10 elements in the array, and then we have our regular constructor that would be similar to like our miscellaneous. This is the same thing as like our miscellaneous. Any question on this? We'll move to, so we just did some configuration of arrays. Any questions? We can move on to this. All right, so reading the arrays. All right, so how we read the array is by indexing it like this, right here. Can everyone see my pointer? Like the point of my mouse?
Yes.
So for this A, we're creating an array called A with one index, and that first index, or that 0th index first element, we have a string called world. And if we want to read this, we can say A at index 0, and we're putting it into this value. So this value is going to equal the same thing as this world string value. So this is what we're saying. We're reading element 0. Now, and this is an example if we want to write in a specific index. So in this array called A at index 1, we're going to write 3.14 into that array. So then it would be saved off. So you can also index with a variable if it's a numeric value, an integer, not a float though. There's no such thing as 1.2 index, but there is 1, 2, 3 index. So in this array called A, we are using this variable called I, and that value is 2. So in index 2, we're going to write the element 3. Now we can also do some math, kind of how we did when we initialized with our base plus 1. If we looked at the last slide, previous. The last slide, when we did our base plus 1, base plus 2, you can do the same thing with our indexing. We can do I plus 1, so that means we're going to be indexing into array index 3. So this is I is equal to 2, and we're going to add 1 to it, so this is array index 3, and we're going to put hello into this element 3. Now, if you remember, A indexed I is a value of 2. What we're doing here is we're reading the value at index 2. The value at index 2 is element index 2, which would be our value 3 right here. So we're going to say in the index of 3, we're going to write the value of index 0 in here. So it's taking our elements 0 and 2 and writing element 3. And that can be a little tricky there, but just you gotta break it down piece at a time. And then also there's this method called length that we can take our array and say dot length, and it will return the value of how many items are within this array. So this would be good for looping through arrays. All right, we'll move on to the next one, sparse arrays. So here this is similar to what we had before. We created an array of empty 5 elements. No, I'm not sure if this comment is quite right, but it's 5 empty elements, and we can see the length. If we did a.length, it would be 5. A equals open and close brace. This would be an empty array. There's no elements. This would be length 0. And then if we took the array and we put index 1000 and we assigned it to the value 0, we would have a length of 1001. But if we were to index into like 999, that would be nothing in that spot because it's not initialized. Only the 1000th index is going to be initialized. So that's what we call a sparse array, when that we have an array where it's not completely filled up with values, either strings, numerics, or booleans. All right, so we'll move on to the array length. As you can see here, we can take the array and use that dot length. So it doesn't have to be the variable of the array. You can also use, like this for example, you can do dot length on this creation of the array, and that will do is return that length. So you see here on this third bullet, we created an array, and if we did dot length, we can also overwrite the length by saying dot length equals 3. Then that will chop the 2 values off the end of the length. If we did a.length equals 0, that would delete all the elements in the array. And then if we were to expand it, a.length equals 5, then if we did this after we did the a.length is 0, we would have an array that is empty. It would be similar to like the new array of 5 elements. So many things you can do with the dot length. So now moving on to adding and deleting array elements. So this is can be a little different than what we've seen before. We're going to start with an array, empty array, and we're going to add at index 0 the string 0, and then we're going to add at index 1 the string 1. So these are 2 adding elements at a specific index. We can also do the array.push, and that will add this whatever's in the push argument, this value at the end of the array. So it would add it at index 2. If we reassigned it like this, a equals 1, 2, 3, then it will overwrite the values of what we had initialized before. We can also delete an element by doing the delete a with the index, our array with the index. So now that if we were to print out the a of index 1, it would just be an empty element. We also have this ability to search an array by saying 1 or a string in the array, and that will return whether or not okay, so it's not searching in the array. What it's doing is it's checking to see if there is something defined at that index. So it was index 1 in the array A. So we see here that since we deleted the A index 1, it would return false because array does not have an index 1 as defined. Even though we do delete the index 1, it still has length 3 because that index 2, we still have 3. So this would be like erasing 2 right in the middle of our array. We still have our index 0 and our index 2, which means we have a length of 3. So remember, our arrays are start on index 0, so this will be 0, 1, 2, but the length will be a total of 3. All right, so now we're going to do some iteration of arrays. And I'm going to exit out of this and show how to do this. We're just going to copy it and put it into our code. So, all right, so we have our sparse array, and then we're going to use our dot length, and we're going to use a for loop with our index 0, and we're going to keep going as long as our index is less than the length. And then we're going to increment by 1. And what we're going to do here is we're going to check to see, is this item undefined? If it is, we're going to print out this is undefined, and the index is the index that we have, we're looping through, and then we're just going to print the value. And if it is null, we're going to check to see, we're going to check to see if it's a null item. If it is, then we're going to print, and otherwise we're going to print the index with the value. So we'll save this and run it. So you can see here, index 0, the value is 3. Index 1, the value is 2. At index 3, or index 2, you can see that it is undefined. There's nothing there, so we have undefined. At index 3, we have text right here. Index 4, we have 3.4. At index 5, we have a null, like a null special character. So you can see here we have a null when we check to see if it's null. Index 6, we have the string test. In index 7, we have undefined. Everyone good on that? All right, so we're going to do another one, iterating arrays part 2. And so this is just another way of looping through the arrays using a for in. It's the same thing. And print the same thing. So the only difference, so it's just, I'm going to show you the two differences. So this is the difference. Instead of keeping track of our index and saying that we want to keep going until the length, if we were to say for index in the array, it's going to do this for us. And we don't have to know what the length is. So it's going to go each item in the array. And if we save it and run it, we can see the same exact values. Does everyone understand that? The for index in sparse array. Okay, someone. Okay, Jonathan is trying to join. Let's see. I wonder if is he viewing? Stop screen sharing for a second. We don't have any viewers. Email him. It's, All right, so I sent the email off to him. Let's go back to sharing. Entire screen, and we're going to go to the office. Am I sharing my screen? I don't know. Oh, I got to click share button. There we go. Is everyone? It looks like I'm sharing. All right, so now we're going to go into multi-dimensional arrays. So let's run this multi-dimensional array here. So what we're doing here is we're initially creating 10 elements in our first array called table. And then within each index of the table, we're going to create another 10 elements in the array. So if we take a look, let's pull up Excel. Actually, I don't have LibreOffice. Let's see, what is the Excel?
Google Sheets.
Okay, I could do that too. Good idea. All right, so what we're doing here is we're creating 10, just think of it, 10 elements right here. But then within each 10 elements, we're going to create 10 more items within each element. So we're going to have 10 items here, then we're going to have 10 items here, then we're going to have 10 items here, and 10 items here, so on and so on. And then eventually we pretty much have a two-dimensional table where we have two indexes. We have the row and the column. So this would be like 1A, 1B, 1C, and then or C4 or 4C, whichever, I forget which, depending on which way you call it. And then that's kind of how what we're doing here is we're creating a multi-dimensional array. So we create our first array, and then we're going to loop through this, and at index 0, we add 10 more items within that table. So that would be like adding 10 more items. And then at index 1, we have 10 more items. And then at index 2, we have 10 more items. And then we're going to loop through both of them. And you have to do that through 2 loops, 2 for loops, or 2 for in loops, whichever way. But for this one, we're going to use for, and we're going to create a variable called row, while row is less than table. Then we're going to have for column, while column is less than the length of our table.row. If you remember, we have 10 elements in this index of the row. And then we're going to loop through the columns. So then what we're going to do here is we're going to, oh, do I have the print? No, I don't. We're going to say row times column and put it into the table. And then let's do another loop to print it. And we want to do, maybe we want to do a string, because if we did this, it'll just go straight down and it won't look very pretty. So let's just do this. So yeah, straight down, doesn't look very pretty. So let's be a little smart about this and do var build string equals empty string. I'm going to, let's print a string after this for loop, like this. And then we're going to do a build string, which would be plus equals string, and then we're going to add space at the end. So we'll save this and run it. So there we go. Actually, let's add a tab to make it look a little nicer. So if you this is kind of, I would say, somewhat, I mean, kind of similar, but it's not a two-dimensional array for one of our homeworks. We will loop through and kind of go through the table. But basically you have here, it would be row times column. At 0, 0, it's 0. At 0 and 1, it's 0, so on and so on. At 1, 1, it's 1. At 1, 2, it's 2. At 2, 1, it's 2. At 2, 2, it's 4. And at 1, 9, it's 9. And, you know, that's what we have, our table. What we could do quickly to just modify it, if we didn't want to go through the whole thing, if we want to just chop off all the zeros, we can just modify it, say start at row 1 and column 1. So we save that and run it, and there we go, we chopped off all the zeros. What if we wanted to not have the last one, maybe, or last two? We can do length minus 2, so that would chop off these 2 rows and these two columns and these 2 rows, like this. So if we did that, here we go. For some manipulations of our tables that we can do. All right, so that is our multidimensional arrays. I know that sometimes it can be tricky, and you don't have to, I guess, completely understand it now. You might not use it too much, maybe in the assignments we have, but I would say getting involved in programming, you probably will eventually use two-dimensional arrays. They're not too bad to wrap your head around. Okay, so this is the part where you do the printing. And we did it with the foreign table, so we can do that. We can show how we can do that same thing like this. This goes, it's not as clean because it says row, column, value. I think the other one was a little prettier. So row, column, value. All right, so let's move on to array methods. Before we move on, was there any questions on multidimensional arrays? If no, silence, I'll move on. See if I get any more emails. Oh, Jonathan, he joined. Jonathan. Follow student. And then we're going to invite more. Jonathan. Invite. All right. He muted, so maybe he'll be joining soon. Well, he will probably join soon, I would think. We'll guess we'll continue. Keep an eye out. I don't see the whether or not when he joined or not. Oh, did he say something? I can see what you're doing. Okay, you can probably hear me too. I think there's a way to go through Google Hangouts to join this event. You probably are on this page and click start or watch. I think going out of that and going to just like search Google Hangouts, and that might pop up where you can enter in.
The little tiles on the top right-hand side, sir, right next to your,
This
right
guy?
there. Yep.
Yeah.
And then find more, and Hangouts will probably be there if it's not there
Okay,
yet.
so maybe there. Go to there, and then maybe somewhere in here there might be like a notification where you can join.
That's
So,
correct.
awesome. All right, thank you, Hami. All right, so we'll continue with our array methods. Get this going. Okay, so we have our join method here. And what that can do is it converts things to, it can add things between things or join the elements in the array. So if we did a simple a.join right here, that converts all these into a string, one element string, as you can see here. If we did a.join with space, it would put spaces in between where each item is. If we did a.join with no space, it would remove the commas and put it into a string value with no spaces. If we wanted to create an array, an empty array of 11 or 10 elements, and we did b.join with our dash, it would put our dash into one element and combine them all together like that. So that would be the delimiter. This gives you the delimiter of combining them all together. There's another array method called the reverse, which can be pretty nice. Basically what it does is it swaps the values, so 3 would be in the first one, and then 1 would be at the end, and then 2 doesn't go anywhere because it's in the middle of an odd array. And what we could do here is we could chain our methods together, saying we want to reverse them, we want to join them. And since our join with no arguments converts it with commas and puts it into a string. So we had 3, 2, 1, like that. Now, so the join does not affect the array, but the reverse does affect the array. And I think we can go in and do some examples to print out and see. And we have sort here, which we can sort if you had a list of different things like we have here, sorting, and then we wanted to join them with a comma space delimiter. That's where we would have one string, apple, banana, cherry. And concat means we want to concatenate the strings at the end. So we say we want to add 4 and 5 at the end of the array, 1, 2, 3. And then we want to add another array that has 2 elements into this array that we have already. And then you can also do some concatenation, like multiple arrays within arrays, as you can see here. I don't see using that. I could see using the reverse and sort, maybe the join, but probably not too much. Slice. Slice also returns values. So we say we want to grab the array at index 0 and index 3. And I think my picture here is a slice, but it's supposed to talk about splice. Splice, I believe, updates the array in the same type of manner. Let's try it out after. I'll go into push and pop first, and then we can try these methods out. Push adds things to the end of the array, and pop removes the last item in the array. So you can see we push 1 and 2 onto the array, we have our stack, and then we pop one time, then we remove 2, and then we push 3 onto the end of the stack, and then we pop one more, and then we remove 3, and then we push an array of 4, 5, which is an embedded array, so that's at 1 index, and then we pop. That will pop that whole array because it's at 1 index. Whoops. Previous. And then we pop one more times, and that would remove that one element in the array. So let's do some practice on some of these. Var a equals 1, 2, 3 console.log a.join. Spaces with no spaces. So if you run these guys, and then we can print console log just a. So it just returns the values. It doesn't actually modify the array. So if we wanted to update the array, we'd have to just set a equal to the join, so something like this. A equals a.join, so it would update the array, the a variable, if we wanted to do that. And then we can do reverse. And you can see reverse modifies the string because we did a reverse and then we did a join with no delimiter. And then we printed out our array A is now reversed. So A does affect, the reverse does affect our string. So does sort, it affects our string. And whoops, let's go back. Concat does affect our string. We can try that. Oh no, it doesn't affect the string. It will return a value. So yeah, it adds it to the end, but it doesn't modify the array. All right, so we'll go to the next one. So slice, and then splice. And we'll concat. Let's push this instead of concat. So push modifies the string. And then let's do a slice. Slice on what index? 2 and 3. So return 2 of them between push 4 items. Let's print it. Console log a to see what it looks like before we print it. So we say at index 2 and index start at after index 2 and include index 3. So it does not include, or wait, slice 2. 2 includes index 2 and does not include index 3. So got to remember 0, index 1, index 2, and does not include index 3. So we have 1. That's what we have printed out right here. So that's correct. And then we can print out the array at the end to see if it modified it. It shouldn't have. That's good. What if we did splice of the same thing? So splice modifies the arrays. Wait a minute. Let's comment this one out for a second. Slice modifies it. I believe it modifies it. No. A before is 1 and 2. Now this is the return value of splice. We want to do 2 and 3. So splice includes, it returns what you're cutting off. And then, so this is what we're saying. We're returning what we're cutting off, which is our index 2 and index 3. And then, as you can see, what we have for our modified, what we have left is our index 0 and index 1. All right, so let's move on to, let's see, strings as arrays. So our string, you could think of it as an array of characters. And there are 2 methods you can use, or 1 method and 1 you can index. So we can say var s is test, and we can say we want to get the character at index 0, which would return t since t is at index 0. So you can think of a string as just an array of characters, and then what the character is just 1 letter. So this would be characters index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. So if we did s at index 1, we would return e. So not too bad. Anything before we move on to functions and arrays? Anything you want me to go over? Looks like he joined. I'm still here. Will the video be available to watch from the start later? Yes. It will be available to watch. You probably hear me, so yes. All right, so we'll move on to functions, defining functions. We're going to create a function called the distance function. And let's exit out of here, and we will actually, the next slide might use it. Between 2 Cartesian points, x1, y1, and x2, y2. And we can invoke functions like this. So what we will do is exit. And we're going to go to defining functions. We need to take this, add it into our file, and then we're going to go and print it. Define our variables, x1, x2, y1, y2, and then we invoke our function like this. So we're in a function. It can have arguments, or it can have no arguments. It can have as many as you want, or it can have as little as you want. 0 arguments. You can have a function just called no distance. Have no arguments and just say console log no distance. So that would be a function. And then you can have a function like this, distance with arguments. So this is argument x1, y1, x2, y2. This x1 is not the same as this x1. This x1 is scoped based off what it was passed in. So we could say 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have to pass a variable. It could be a number. Into this x1, when we call this function, this is what is called calling a function. If we call this function, x1 is going to equal this value that's being passed in. So these x1 is not the same as this x1. I'm just using it for just as a reference. So x1, we're passing in the definition of this x1, x2, y1, y2. Pass it in here. We use this x1 right here, and this y1 right here, this x2 right here, this y2 right here. Then we have our dx and dy, and we do our square root over dx squared plus dy squared. And then we return the value. So what that means is that would be similar to what we had in like our like array dot join dot length like this. This returns the length of this array. So this will be the same thing as the return value will return from the distance. So when we call distance, whatever this calculation happens to be, it will return the value. And then if we did this plus sign in here, we want to add it to this log, console log. So if we print the distance here, it will print out the return value of the distance. And we'll save it and run it. And then we'll also say, if we called our no distance, it calls this function, which then calls the console log right here, no distance call. So we see here, this is the distance, and this is the value of the numbers being passed into the distance, and then it does the mathematical calculation. Any questions on this introduction to this one function and invoking functions? All right, so we will start back up on the slideshow. So that's how we invoke our functions. Function arguments and parameters. Functions, arguments, there's a difference between arguments and parameters. Arguments are what is being passed in to a function call. Parameter is the items of the definition of the function. So this is a definition of a function, and it has our parameters. This is O, and then A. You don't have to have parameters if you don't want to. This is just an example. Also, what it's saying here, optional, if you define a list of parameters, that doesn't mean that the person has to pass those in. JavaScript allows you to, you can say get property names and not pass in any arguments. And what will happen is, for an example, since this get property names is being called with one argument, this O will be defined, but this A is not defined because it's not being passed in when we call get property names. So if we did our check to say A is equal undefined, and we define A as an empty array, then we're going to look through our properties. A property of O, we're saying that O is an array, and we're going to look through this on each property, and then we're going to push each property into the array and then return the array. And what this is doing another get properties, and it just basically what this does is it adds the properties in the O into the array and returns the array. Any questions on this, on optional parameters? All right, so we'll move on to here. Function arguments and parameters, part 2. Function argument. So for here, we can use this arguments object. For this function, we have 3 parameters, and we want to check to see if we have if the arguments are passed in is the same number. So if we look back at our last problem, whoops. If we look back at our last slide, we can have optional parameters, right? We don't have to pass in the argument, right? Optional parameters, we check to see if it's undefined. Now, with our arguments object, we can check to see how many arguments were passed in. And if it's not the same amount as what is expected, then we can just print and print this, throw this error saying what is being passed in. We were expecting to have 3 arguments, only 2 arguments were passed in, or something like that. So what you could do now is define a function with just one parameter, and then you're going to loop through all of them right here. You can say, we're going to say arguments, in the arguments list, we're going to loop through all of them, no matter what it is, and then just calculate, figure out the max of what's passed in. So for example, we want to get the max number between all of these arguments we pass in. And it's going to print out 1,000. And it knows how many arguments are passed in because this arguments object has the dot length. And it's also an array, so you can loop through it. So that could be helpful. Any questions on this? Just stop me. I'm just going to continue on. Next slide. Functions as values. So we can define a function into a variable, and we can define a function as a member of an. So what we're doing here is we're saying we're going to create a function called square. Then we're going to create a variable equal to the square. So you can then reuse s. If you can pass in s, a 4 into the s, and that's the same thing as passing 4 into the square. You can also do something similar with this variable object that we call O. It's defining a property called square, and we're defining its function right here. And then we can call O.square, because this has a member of this object. And then it's going to call this, we're going to pass in this argument 16, and it's going to call this function. So we're defining this function in this property. So then we're going to return this value, and that's what y is going to be. Y equals 256. This is kind of a little trickery. I don't see anyone really needing to know this. It just can be helpful in the future if you had something that was like a really long function and you wanted to rename it, maybe from a library or something like that. All right, so next one, variable scope. This is pretty important. Let's see, variable scope. Variable scope. So what this is saying is when we create variables with the same name, they are visible at a certain level of scope. So we're saying when we create variable scope equals global scope, this means that scope is visible to anything here. Anything in here. This scope is only local to anything within the function itself. It's not visible outside this check scope function. Then we have a function, a nested function within this check scope, and then this scope is only visible at the nested scope. So if we said check scope, what would return in scope? And it would be the nested scope, because it would drill down and say check scope would then call create nested scope, and then in our check scope it calls nested scope. So in nested scope we go in here and we see scope is equal to nested scope, and we return scope, and that's what would be return value right here is nested scope. Now if we had a variable called scope right here, so this is moving on to the next one. Is there any questions on the first example of the scoping in the functions? I can step through it again if you want me to. It could be quite tricky to understand, but it's just kind of it's trying to just show you how if you just name a variable called scope here. It's not visible outside this function right here. But if you name variable scope here, it can be visible here into this nested function as long as you don't have another variable called scope. So the local scope, the most local scope, is what takes precedence over global scope. Just have unique names and stay away from global variables. Everyone says that that's a very bad thing in programming. So we'll go to the second example. We have another variable called scope called global, assigned global. And if we printed out this function and we printed console.log, it would print global. Then if we created another variable called local, okay, so actually that's not true, what I said before. If we did console.log, it would print undefined, and that's because of hoisting. Since this variable scope is defined within this function scope, it gets hoisted to the beginning. Any variable that's defined in this scope function f gets hoisted to the beginning of the function and is called undefined. So when we do a print scope here on this third line, we will print undefined because it's not defined. And it will only be defined once we get to this line right here and we say scope is equal to local, and then when we do print scope, it would print local. If scope was not visible at all, if these two lines were not here and we did console.log, it would print out global. But since this variable scope is defined in our function, it gets hoisted to the beginning of the function and is undefined until it reaches this line where it assigns to local. All right, closure. This is combining a function, object, and a scope, and we're setting a variable, we're binding the variable to this object, and in which the function's variable is resolved, which is called a closure. And a closure is similar to object-oriented programming, where you have an object that has some properties. Think of a car. We can have a class called car, and it may have properties like number of doors, number of wheels, type of engine, and you can define that for that object when you create a new car. Say you create a car called Honda Civic, and you define the doors are 4 and the engine is gas. Well, those variables will stick with that object, and you can create another object called Tesla Model S, and the number of doors is 4, where the engine is electric. And those variables are going to stick with those objects. So those scope variables are going to stick with the function. So we can look at this example. Okay, so these were from before, our closures. So we can save it, run it. So we have our nested scope, what we had before. When we go to check scope, goes in here. Since scope is defined in here, this local scope overwrites what this global scope is. And then we have defined this function called f. And since on the return value of check scope called f, we go in here, this scope overwrites this local scope to nested scope, and then we return this scope right here, this nested scope, and that's what we see when we print out check scope. All right, so we'll move on to the second one, closures. All right. So what we have here is this function called counter. It has a local variable called n, and it returns back the count and that's going to be defined as a function which increments the n, and then reset, which then resets the n. So we create two variables, one c and one d. These are objects which internally have this n defined, and they keep track of themselves. So what we can do here is we can say c.count, and it will increment c's n property to 1, to 1, I believe. Yes, 1. And then the d's would be also, at this point in time, the d's n would not be updated. But then if we did d.count, then it would increase that. If we did c.count, then it resets the n value of only the c object. And we did c.count, it would then increment the c. And then if we did d.count, it would increment the d. So if we run this, save, 0. Oh, that's because, remember, our plus plus, that's post increment. That means that after we print, so we have 0, 0, after we print, we increment it. So if we did the plus plus on the other side, then we see now our ones, and then when we did our reset right here, reset doesn't return anything. See, we could return, we say return n, and then now it would return 0, but since it didn't return anything, it would be undefined. Then we increment the count for c, which is 1. Since we reset it, remember we reset it, go back to 0, and then we increment the count for d, which is then 2. See, they're separate values. Is that good? All right. Moving on to our last example for the night. All right, constant funcs. This has a local array, and what we're saying is this local array, we're defining a function that returns I. If this I is then, it returns I. So this function, we're defining a function that returns I. And this I, we loop through, let's see, this probably is a little better. We loop through this array, and we keep adding another function that returns I. And then when we call this function, it calls the array called, it returns this array. So if we say funcs equals the const funcs, which then returns this internal array, which is then defined right here of an array of functions, we can index into this. So we have our functions, which is the array of functions, and then we can call that function like this. And what does it return? Let's run it. It returns 10. And the reason for that is every time we update the function, the I gets incremented. And so if we change this to 3, it would still be the same as 10. Or 9, it would still be the same as 10, because every time we loop through, it updates the I, and at the end, the I is 10. I know it's very confusing. This one confuses me, and when I try to wrap my head around it, it's like, oh, okay. But that's what it is. Does anyone have any questions? Let's see, does someone else have a comment? All right. Anyone have a comment on this or questions? Yes, no, maybe so. If not, I think that ends our class for today for this presentation. I know Jaime said he wanted to go over an example of our homework. and we can do that if you like. You can stay on, and let's do that. If no one has any other questions, no questions. Okay. Jaime, you can either send me your file or you can share your screen. Either or, I'm fine with.
Either or. I mean, I've tried several times, and
Mhm,
I think I know where. At the beginning, I found out that I was looping through numbers, right? So I cannot
mhm,
find. So I needed to get the get date somewhere around there, right?
mhm,
So, but and there's where I'm at, man. I'm just scratching my head, and it could be something very simple, and I'm just overlooking it. And
mhm. Okay, maybe do you want to share your screen and we can look at it?
yeah, hold on one second. So I've been playing around with different. Uh, 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 Let me know when you can see my
Yeah, I can
screen.
see your screen.
So
Yeah, I can see it.
so this is the one that I had at the beginning, right? So I could get that to print. I'm not happy, right? It does what it is, right? But it's not what I want to because I'm not looping through here. I'm only looping through the number amount of days and creating that variable and then concatenate it into a variable string so I could
Mhm,
be able to tab it. But then I'm filtering through here in the days of the month, and I tab to uh, here in order to get it under the Tuesday,
yeah.
right? Because it starts on a Tuesday. So that's I've been taking this piece of code, right, and this loop here, and I've been just trying to get it, and it's just been a little bit of as you can see, I've tried different ways.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't know, and this is a little bit more that I've played around. I tried to bring it up from scratch again, and for
Uh-huh.
some reason, I think that here in the second loop that I'm doing, let me go back in some of the uh, right. What I wanted to do is somewhere around there is kind of like get the date right of each time that I'm looping. So I threw an
Mhm,
extra variable and I dumped it, but for some reason it did not increment. And even though I took the variable here, like I said, J, and let's say that I could throw in uh, another one uh, call it I, or I don't think I used it, but let me say M,
mhm.
and I wanted to throw in there like I have calendar already as the current month. So in current month is the uh, May 1st, 2012. So is where I'm generating this, some part of it. So I'm trying to see whether using the calendar and passing through. Uh,
So, um, my thought was we have a start date, right? And what you could, based off that start date, you can figure out what day of the week it is, right?
yes, I got it. I got it here. Let me tell you. So once I run this, right, this is the days, right? We have 30 days in the month of
Mhm,
May. This starts on the second on second of the weekday, right?
mhm.
Which is here, which is Tuesday, right?
Right.
Zero,
Yeah.
0, 1, 2, right?
Mhm,
Right. And 7 is the length of the day of the week,
mhm.
right? And Tuesday is I think I have it all. I just don't know how to put it together.
Okay. All right. So, I think from there, maybe I'll take back the screen and do some pseudo code to see if we can figure it out.
So I mean I think I have everything that is needed. I just don't know how in the world to
Right.
put it in that
So,
loop.
so
Yeah.
we have the day of the week, or the current date, or the date, or start. Start
Yes.
date.
You want to know the start date? It's Tuesday, right?
I think just we care about the date, right? First. I don't remember what it was and how it works, but this is a start date, right?
Oh,
And
sorry. Are
then,
you sharing? Are you sharing? I'm not.
oh, maybe not. No, I'm sharing. I think I'm
Okay,
sharing.
okay. No, but I wasn't looking at your screen. Okay, there we go.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Okay, there we go. I
All
was
right.
looking at
So
my screen.
we have the start date, and we also, I think you have a way to get the number of days in the week. I think there was a function online that we could.
Yes, yes, I could get the
So
total number of
we'll
days.
just say number days of the month, right? We can just say it's 31 or something like that. So we're going to loop through for I equals 1, and then var or I is less than days of the month, I plus plus. So from here, what we need to do if for the first day, we need to calculate the number of tabs to add, right? Because to add to the beginning of the string.
So it's two tabs, yes. And I just could not, when I got it, I just could not get the tab into.
All right. So, so I think that would work, right? We're probably going to be building a string, some kind of string builder. And then we're going to calculate that, add tabs. So, and add tabs. This is only for the first day of the loop. We care about the tabs, right?
Right, that's to put it underneath the Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
the two
Yeah,
tabs.
yeah, the two tabs. And then after that, we don't care about that tabs anymore. We can kind of figure out. So, so building, okay, to build a string based on the current day. So Tuesday would be 2 tabs, Wednesday would be 3 tabs, so on and so on. So you could put any date, and this would calculate. This would print the cal.
The
Right.
tabs, right,
Yes.
according to the index of the weekday.
Right. Right. So that's what we want to do for the first one. Then after that, we just need to keep going until the end of the month, or to the end of the week, right? And then the next thing is check if the day is at the end of the week. If so, then add a new line
Back
character,
in, yes.
right? And then at the end of the loop, we want to add 1 day to the start date. And that, when I mean start date, I mean this truly the date, using the date method. Because what we want, because adding a day to the start date would make it easy to check which day it is. Because we have that method to check the day, right?
Yes.
So if we add 1 day to the start date, on the next iteration we know that which day it is, and then we know if it's
The weekday, the weekend,
yes.
the Saturday, to be able to add the backslash
Yes.
in.
Yes. So if we keep adding 1 day to the start date, then we can check the day, and it'll keep going until the end. And I think those are pretty much all the conditions you need to do. Do
Yep.
you see how it is?
Yeah, I think I could try to do it. If not, man, I'm gonna be another day here, and I'll send you another email.
Yeah, that's fine. But I think this is probably a good start. Um,
Yeah, I think I got
to try
everything.
to, basically you want to break it down to as small pieces as you can and not make it too complex. And I think that with this, we probably could. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it, but I think this was the first thing that came to my mind.
No, and you're right. I mean, I think that I'm overcomplicating myself with it.
It's
Uh,
very easy to. Don't worry.
so yes, I mean, I've tried several. So I think that utilizing your pseudocode probably
Mhm.
could help me out. Let me
Yeah.
you don't mind? I'm gonna take a screenshot of that.
I can send this to you if you
Okay.
want in the chat. We can put it in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
There we go. It's in the chat. Everyone got that. All right. So, any more questions for anyone else?
I think I'm at least. Thank you. I really appreciate
Okay.
it.
No problem. Nothing. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining the Google Hangouts. I'm sorry about the whole you have to get invited into the Google Hangouts. I've done this a few times and I always forget how that works. And I think I can remember now that basically I need to send the invites to your email, your Gmail account, and then you can join. Otherwise, you just can watch. So.
Yeah, I think that's recorded in that Google Air everything.
It
So
is. I will send the link out afterwards and send so anyone can view it.
yeah, I was able to see it and then go back and play it back. So
Mhm.
so yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
So
helped out.
anyone who couldn't join us can watch it later. So all right, everyone. Thank you very much for coming,
Thank you.
and stay safe tomorrow. It's gonna be crazy out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you, sir. You too.
All right, no problem.
Bye.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.